welcome to Literary Prospects, where we talk to authors and literary professionals about books, publishing, and the writing life. I'm Kelley Vick. I'm the host of the program, and in just a moment, it will be my pleasure to introduce today's guest. But first, a reminder that if you like what you hear, please do take a moment to subscribe. It helps us out, and you can make sure you never miss an episode. Also, we've opened a Literary Prospects shop, so if you're looking for bookish shirts, totes, and gifts, please check that out at literaryprospects.etsy.com. And to grab books featured on the podcast and check out more curated book lists, you can visit the Literary Prospects bookstore on bookshop.org. And last, but certainly not least, if you're interested in extra content on querying and publishing that's only for our members, please consider joining the Literary Prospects Patreon at patreon.com/literary prospects. We'll leave all those links below in the show notes. And now, let's introduce today's guest. Josh Duboff is a novelist, journalist, and playwright. His debut novel, Early 30s, is out this month. A former senior writer for Vanity Fair, Josh has written cover stories on Taylor Swift, Gwyneth Paltrow, and Gigi Hadid, among others, and co-hosted the magazine's pop culture podcast, In the Limelight. Josh has also contributed to the New York Times Book Review, the Wall Street Journal magazine, Harper's Bazaar, GQ, W Magazine, and others. He also wrote and directed the web series 25 and wrote the play Scarlet Fever, which debuted in the New York International Fringe Festival. A graduate of Yale University, Josh lives in New York City. Josh Duboff, thank you so much for joining today to talk about your wildly entertaining debut novel, Early 30s. Graydon Carter, founder of Airmail and former editor of Vanity Fair, says Early 30s is as sweet and funny as anything you're going to read this year. That it harks back to the last golden age of the magazine business is simply an added bonus. Author Anna Petoniak says, with a voice entirely its own, Early 30s is a sharp, funny, #no filter portrait of the pleasures and perils of youth in New York City and what it's like to become an adult in our terminally online age. Josh Duboff has perfectly captured the anxieties and trepidations that exist beneath the shiny surfaces we present to the world. Chris Black, co-host of How Long Gone, says Josh Duboff perfectly describes how many of us felt in New York City during a pivotal time when things seemed to go from fun to serious. Deeply relatable, timely, and funny, Early 30s made me smile and reflect on my own not-so-distant past. And one more, author Lola Kirk says a brutally honest and spit-take funny novel, Early 30s, perfectly portrays the pain and power of the journey towards a true self and away from others who for so long defined you. I was at once comforted and challenged by Duboff's illumination of the shared loneliness of the stars, the masses, and the people who bring them together. So with that, what can you tell us about Early 30s?
Well, thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here and chatting with you about the book. As I mentioned to you earlier, this is my first podcast interview about the book, so that's very exciting for me. What can I tell you about Early 30s? I think, the way I kind of have described it to people, it's actually shifted a bit, sort of as time has gone on. So I sometimes describe it in different ways, but to me, fundamentally, it's about what happens in your life in this period that's sort of this transition moment. Some of the blurbs describe this, where you start feeling like your friendships are shifting, people's lives are changing for logistical reasons. They're moving they're moving cities, they're building families, they're getting married, they're moving upstate. I'm sure we all have different scenarios that have shifted the dynamics in our different friendships. So I really wanted to write a book that was fundamentally about that kind of funny period in your early 30s, where it starts feeling like your life is changing. You're trying to kind of figure out what the rest of your life is going to look like, maybe career-wise, maybe relationship-wise, maybe friendship-wise. So it's kind of about all of that. And I think, it centers on this one core friendship between Victor and Zoe. I was kind of trying to explore through them the kind of pain and discomfort and strangeness when you feel like you're growing apart from a close friend and someone that's important to you. And I think in talking to people who have read, early copies of the book, or, just people when I tell them what the book's about, I've just been surprised, or maybe I haven't been surprised, about how many people immediately will start talking to me about a story from their own lives. Like, oh
Mhm.
my God, my falling out with my friend. I just had someone yesterday tell me about, oh my gosh, I'm not talking to my friend of 10 years anymore, when I was like telling her what the book's about. So I feel like a lot of people have this kind of situation in their lives to some degree. And that was kind of what I was interested in when I was kind of starting out writing this book, to kind of explore between these two characters.
What was the spark that got this story started for you?
Interesting. I feel like I don't. So it started, so the book has, so as I described, these two main characters, and we shift perspective. So we get into both of their heads a bit. We get into Victor's head for certain chapters, we're in Zoe's head for other chapters. But then we also, without spoiling too much, we get to see the perspectives of characters that kind of they encounter, or that we're not yet sure when we meet them at first how they're going to intersect with Victor and Zoe, and then we later see how. So I think, uh, the initial spark, this idea of the friendship I initially had, and that's sort of what started me kind of on this journey. But I think, I also wanted to get at, sort of through the lens of other characters, sort of like what people who are kind of dealing with this in different ways, or maybe we're in different, and on different steps along this journey of kind of figuring out what they want to do, where they were at. So it was kind of fun for me to kind of dip around and see sort of where, where different people, where the different characters were all looking to the future.
We do get multiple points of view in the book. I wanted to ask you about this because the way that you've chosen to do it is really interesting. We get these different points of view, but Victor is in first person and
Yeah.
everybody else is a close third person. So, what made you decide to do it that way exactly?
Yeah. So the book, and I probably should have added this when I was talking about the initial spark. I worked at Vanity Fair for 6 years. I covered celebrities in my job. When I started, they were like, "We want you to be living in the triangle of Kate Middleton, Marc Jacobs, and Beyonce," which I like could not believe was a job description that like they would give anyone, like for an actual like real job in an office. I was thrilled. And that was more or less what I covered for the 6 years I was working there. Um, so I, so even though the book to me was really about this idea of friendship and what happens in your early 30s, Victor was always kind of the main, I don't know, driving sort of engine for me, in kind of trying to understand what, kind of the themes of the book, kind of the vessel for the themes of the book. So I think it made sense to me. I toyed with all different kind of ways of playing with first person, third person. And I felt like it was kind of interesting to keep Victor in the first person and have everyone else in the third person, as a way to reflect sort of like Victor's feeling of separation from Zoe. Like it
Mhm.
felt to me a little bit like he was in this, he's in his own head a lot, and I feel like the first person was really helpful for that.
Mhm.
And it was kind of enabled me to get into that. But then having Zoe in the third made it, I don't know if this makes sense or if it translates to the reader, but the way I was thinking about it was that, it would help you kind of understand that he was trying, even though we were in Zoe's head in a way through the third person, that it was kind of drawing kind of that the distance in that kind of way formally in a bit.
I think it does work like that. It works beautifully like that. And it's a really interesting choice. And I think it does what you've done
Glad
it.
to hear. Glad to hear. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
We start out with Victor and Zoe, the two best friends, and we're kind of pinging back and forth. And then we get to Erica, who's a celebrity publicist. We're not going to give too many
Yeah.
spoilers. And then we continue to sort of move back and forth and take on some other characters and points of view. How did you decide on the structure, on exactly how you were going to weave all of this together in this narrative?
Yeah. So yeah, as you mentioned, it starts, so we kind of start with Victor and Zoe, and I knew that was important to kind of, they're the core of the book. It was kind of starting with them was important to me. And then the way that the other characters weave in, It was a lot. There was one period where I had like, I don't know if you watched Homeland, but like Carrie Matheson style, like index cards up on the wall. Like I was writing, I had so many pieces at one point because it was helpful for me to just write as much as possible for all of them, sort of. So I actually ended up kind of I always kind of knew the basic structure, so I knew kind of where we needed to get in terms of the story. But I feel like I ended up writing for some of the characters that in the final version of the book are only really reflected in like maybe one chapter dedicated to them. I have many more chapters that like ended up not going into the book just to kind of like flesh out their story. Or I would write for one, there's an actress character where I actually spent time writing like 100 of her tweets just to like help me get into her head. And a lot of that and then, so some of that was in there actually in the first version of the book, but it started to feel a little like patchworky. So I feel like I needed to
Mm.
end up kind of, I really wanted to like at the end, I felt like trimming it down to fundamentally everything that was going to service the like Victor Zoe story, and then that became like the driving force, and the things that started feeling extraneous, like some of the like stuff that I really it's fun, and maybe at some point I'll like release it online or something, kind of like as like a bonus track or some sort of thing. But I feel like it wasn't necessarily serving the main narrative. So I feel like I don't know, it took a lot of like I knew I needed to get so Victor starts the book in his kind of he's starting out his career at this, celebrity magazine as a celebrity journalist. And, we kind of see his career ascent. And I knew it was important to kind of show those key benchmarks of like his first big interview with an actress, the way that kind of like you feel like everything's going to change in your career when something like that happens. And then it doesn't necessarily, when the article comes out, turn out the way maybe he anticipates it's going to. And kind of having to navigate that and sort of like the deflation maybe he feels a bit, and then sort of how his career arc is juxtaposed with how his arc with Zoe is kind of progressing. So yeah, it was a lot. I guess it's hard to, it's funny, like I sort of, it came together. Sometimes I'm like, how did I like figure out how to structure? I don't even know. It was like, it kind of took a lot of like piecing and figuring out sort of the beats, and then a lot of like having everything in place and then feeling like, oh, actually maybe this, there was a few small things I would shift around a bit, when it felt like, oh, maybe this actually will be like great to happen before this, that kind of thing. But yeah, it kind of it all ended up kind of fitting together. My editor was so helpful too, and kind of helping me figure out sort of like what are the key pieces we really need, what are the key things we can kind of like, scrape away. So it was kind of it was a process.
We've mentioned that much like Victor in the
Yeah.
novel, you've had a very exciting career writing about celebrities and pop culture. Done cover stories on Taylor Swift, Gwyneth Paltrow, Gigi Hadid. Can you talk a little bit more about that? How you ended up getting that gig, um, and how close your experience is to what we see in the novel?
Yeah, of course. So I think, as I mentioned, I started, Vanity Fair. I was in I had been doing all sorts of writing. I was a freelancing for a bit. I was writing for New York Magazine's blog for a while. And then I actually took a pivot and wrote a web series and a play, and was kind of thinking maybe I was going to pursue that route. And then this Vanity Fair job kind of presented itself and was like a dream come true to me. It was like such a special place to work, and I met so many wonderful people there. It was really like a dream gig. And at first I was writing for the website for vanityfair.com, and that was mainly, like blog posts, or you would interview people. And then I got the chance to interview Taylor Swift for the cover of the magazine. It was like the September issue. I got to go to London, spend like the weekend with her. I was backstage at the concert. I got to like chat with her at a hotel for a while. I got to like see her at the photo shoot. It was very surreal and very wild to have that be like my first big celebrity profile, and have it be like the cover
That's
story
crazy.
there. Yes. I know. I sometimes think back, I was like, it feels like I not from drinking, like blacked out from just kind of how crazy the whole thing was. And like going to London for it. It was all very heightened. And she was a great first interview subject because she was so present and articulate and like savvy and smart about talking about her life and career. And like it was just like it made it for such a great like it was a dream interview subject. So Yeah, it was very special. And I feel like I had the chance to then interview a lot of, as you mentioned, a variety of like kind of interesting celebrities. I kind of got to do some things that I never would have expected in my career. Like I remember at one point they sent me to like Florida to watch Prince Harry play in a polo match. And I tried to like chase him down after to get like a brief interview. There was like just all kinds of like wild situations. So yeah, I definitely had quite a number of experiences. I felt I left Vanity Fair in like 2019, I think. So it's been a few years. And I think after my time there, I think there's some similarities in terms of like my the kind of career I had there, and I still write celebrity profiles for various publications now. um I would say maybe the Victor's career is kind of different. I don't want to say too much about like what happens to him, but I do think his experience for his first big interview was not at all similar to like my Taylor Swift experience. But I think I definitely was sort of bringing um I don't know, some of the like feelings and anxieties and kind of the weirdnesses of interviewing famous people. And I think there's a lot of the kind of I'm very interested in like the public persona versus the private persona. And I feel like so much of my celebrity profiling was kind of trying to explore that, where I feel like in so many of my profiles I end up coming back to this question of like, how is the extremely famous person sitting across from me either different or similar from like the way they
Mhm.
present themselves to the world, and I or on Instagram, or on TV appearances, or how they dress. And I feel like so often there was like a very interesting dynamic between how someone felt to me just conversing with them as like a friend at lunch, versus how maybe we would perceive of them as like a celebrity, as a brand. So I think that's something I think we all kind of experience in our day-to-days on much, smaller degrees, like the way we all post on our own social media feeds, or the way we all kind of like, show ourselves or dress or present ourselves versus what's actually like going on with our, inner monologues. So I think that is something that bled into the book a lot. Like kind of the way I would think about my characters, I actually feel like was very similar to how I would think about my celebrity profiling, and that like it was a lot of oh, how is this character? There's a podcaster character in the book, and it would be like, how is she different when she's on her podcast versus what she's like in the scenes we see her in when she's not on the podcast? Or, what is this even Victor, like, he's working for this magazine. What does he present to the world about what his life and career is like versus what it actually is like to be him in his day to day? So I think I was doing a lot of that thinking, which I was surprised at how similar it felt to some of the celebrity profile work I do. I guess it makes sense. It's kind of like writing about people and characters. So I feel like there was some of that. I don't, it's funny. I'm so, sorry, this is a long-winded answer to your
I
question.
love long-winded answers.
Yeah, but I will say I actually feel like it's interesting people who know me. I think there's in some ways Victor is like me, and he had a similar job to me. I actually feel like in terms of like our personalities and our ways of viewing the world, we're kind of quite different. So it's actually been funny having some of the conversations I've had with friends who have been like, wait, did this like so and so like plot from the book happen to you? Like assuming that somehow it's going to be really similar to Victor's life. I'm like, no, no, no. Like that was, so there's like, I totally get it. Like I do that too when I'm reading books and it's like about someone's, the main character has a similar job or profession or like whatever. But I do feel like, there's some differences too. So it's interesting. Yeah.
How do your characters come to you?
Ooh, good question. I don't know. I feel like maybe this has to do back to what I was just saying about maybe some of the celebrity. I've just so a lot of my work at Vanity Fair was profiling. I also did like party reporting where I would literally just be at parties and watching people.
Sounds like a terrible job.
Yeah. No, I know, not bad. But basically, the job at parties would be to like just literally walk, like look around and kind of like try to monitor on my phone, like what celebrities were there and like what was happening and who was talking to who. And I feel like I just feel like so much of it is observation. It's just like when you're profiling someone, you're really trying to pick up as much as possible on everything that makes them tick. Like, what are they, there's like the classic tropes of like when you read the beginning of a celebrity profile and they describe like what the meal is or what they're ordering or what music they're listening to or like, all those little things that people want to read about when they're reading about the people they kind of like, idolize or look up to. I just feel like there's so much of that in the job. So I feel like as a result of that, I think I've just become a big kind of, I'm always thinking about characters or something. Like, I don't know. I just feel like I'm always kind of thinking about like what are the like things that make up a person or kind of like what are the ways people present or, some of the characters in the book, none of them are like one-to-one copies of anyone, but like, I definitely feel like I encountered so many you know, I had a podcast for a while. I was cause met so many people who did podcasting, and I feel like there's just so many kinds of people I met who do podcasts. I'm talking to podcasts. Yeah, I feel like you must have the same thing. Like we listen to a lot of podcasts. You have that in your head. So I feel like there's like this kind of podcasting character just kind of came really easily to me as someone who I feel like I understood. Same with the publicist character, having interacted with so many publicists like I think there's just a lot of these characters that kind of had always kind of maybe been like somewhere in my head just having done this job for so long. So I feel like it was fun. It just kind of like I don't know, it was everyone came very like fully realized and it was I don't know, that sounds strange, but just like it kind of felt like I like understood these people very quickly to me.
The novel is really funny. We heard everybody in the blurbs talking about how witty and hilarious it is. But it also covers some much darker territory. It's not a spoiler because it's page one. We open with Victor in the hospital after a suicide attempt.
Yeah.
How do you strike that balance with using humor to address much more serious topics on the page?
Yeah, I think that's something I thought about a lot. I think it's always sort of been it wasn't so much my work, of course, when I was like profiling celebrities or some of my work at Vanity Fair. But as I mentioned, I did like had a play and a web series I was working on before, and it's always been in my fiction work, I guess, or like my screenplay and playwriting work. I feel like it's something I keep coming back to. It seems like this kind of the odd kind of melange of like dark and light, maybe. I think humor is sort of my default sort of mode as a writer for like it's just kind of what I enjoy tapping into. I think it's like it's kind of just what comes naturally to me. And I think I do often feel like maybe sort of the public-private dichotomy, that there's a lot that kind of, maybe the ways people might seem or present, there's like a lightness or a buoyancy or a sense of humor, and then there's like really dark stuff going on that you never really understand or you can't quite get at. And I feel like that's something I was really excited to explore, especially through Victor, but Zoe has it a bit too, actually, where
Mhm.
it's like there's sort of I don't want to say necessarily anguish, but really dark things happening and like really like tough stuff. But like then you kind of have to like go about your job. You have to like, like try to have fun with your friends. You kind of like, I don't know, I feel like that's something I feel like I talk to my friends a lot about where like, you know, whatever's going on, like crazy stuff is going on in the world right now and like every day. And but we all still try to like you still have to like you go to your friend's birthday party and you try to have a good time and like make jokes and like so I don't know, I just feel like there's like a lot of that I kind of always find interesting in life, just the way we kind of have to like grapple with these kind of intense, dark things going on while we're trying to like get about our lives. And I think that's something that I guess, I don't know, that makes it sound maybe even more. I think there's like part of that was kind of going into what I was trying to do here, where it's trying to like, we don't always know what's going on with people. People mask things really well. And like, I think that's something that I kind of wanted to get at a bit. And maybe that comes across. I don't know.
It does.
That's good. Okay.
It's a coming of age story. And I'm surprised that we don't see more coming of age stories about this particular part of life, the early 30s, because it really is that time when things shift from your friends being your family to creating families of your own, sort of coming of age more in yourself. At least that was my experience in New York as well. I'm wondering if you think that this is kind of a New York phenomenon. Maybe the shift happens a little earlier in different
They're
parts of the world.
interesting. Yeah, I think that's probably right, actually, because I don't have such a great, sample for this, but I do feel like it seems to me my friends in Boston, I don't know, maybe you're right. I do think New York, your 20s are such a mess, for lack of a better word. I just feel like, especially in New York, it feels that way to me, where you're trying to like, make enough money to live. You're trying to like figure out what you want to do. You like are dating a million people. You're like, I don't know, just like there's a lot of like what's going on here energy.
Mhm.
And I think there's still some of that in your 30s, but it's like it starts feeling like a totally different setup. It's especially I think, for me, a lot of my friends have kids now. A lot of my friends, have different careers and different kind of like I hesitate to say values, but different things that maybe priorities in their lives than they did in their 20s. I do feel like it maybe does happen a little bit later in New York. I just think it's such an interesting, I was alluding to this a little bit at the beginning, but like, so many things can shift in your friendships. And like, I do think some of that really like locks in your 30s in a different way. It's like,
Mhm.
people, if you don't vibe with like your friend's partner and then they're married and then it's like they have kids, you have to like navigate that in a way that like in your 20s, I feel like stuff doesn't necessarily always feel that grave. There isn't necessarily that sense of like, okay, this is like the rest of our lives now. Whereas in your 30s, I think it starts to creep in a bit that it's like, okay, now we're making decisions that like really actually like affect everything moving forward in a different way or something. I guess it's just getting older. But it's like, so yeah, I think to me it's an interesting period of life. And I agree. I don't feel like I've necessarily read, there's a lot I read about. I feel like there's a lot about like your college age, coming out of college, early
Right.
20s, teens. And I feel like this time of life, even in like television shows and stuff, there isn't quite as much of it. It's like it's just kind
Mhm.
of like it's like a different thing. It's like a little harder to kind of everyone's doing their own thing. So I feel like maybe it's harder to universalize the experience. But yeah, I feel like New York is it's really connected to New York to me. I think you're right.
Mhm. Have you always been a writer?
God, yeah, probably. I mean, my mom will tell you, like, I was like writing, I feel like I would just be doing so many like I would make my brother, I have two little brothers, and I would like ask them, I would make them be in my play. I would write these plays when I was a kid and just like make them like dress up and they had to act out these like crazy scenarios. I would like interview everyone for like surveys and like articles and just like write articles about my parents and just like I don't know, like any opportunity I had to like like I don't know, I guess journalism is probably the word for it, but like to kind of like interview people or write about it. And like when I was in second grade, I remember writing this like Treehouse Kids series that I was like, it was like my whole like life for all of second grade. It was just like every day I would come home and like write new Treehouse Kids books for myself. But like, so yeah, it just was kind of something that felt I don't know where that comes from. I guess it's just, I read a lot. I was excited to kind of like, I just always wanted to be a writer. And journalism was really my thing throughout high school and college. And it didn't really turn into like, I feel like I shifted more to wanting to write about characters and kind of deciding that I wanted to try kind of understanding how I operated as a fiction writer, maybe more in my like mid 20s. But I think, uh, I don't know. Yeah, writing was just always such a foundational. It was just like how I identified. I don't know.
When did you make the decision to shift from the journalism focus and start working on this novel?
So I have a fantastic agent. We actually went to the same high school. He was a year ahead of me, and he kind of we didn't really stay in touch necessarily when we first were in New York, and I feel like we knew each other a bit, but we kind of reconnected much later on. And I was kind of chatting with him about some ideas I had, and at the time I thought maybe I would write something more in the nonfiction realm, like maybe it would
Mhm.
be a book about some I don't know, pop culture topic or a nonfiction topic. I kind of was thinking through if there was something that would really excite me there. And it's again, like I kept coming back to wanting to write characters. Like I just coming like Victor and Zoe were kind of always in my head. I knew I wanted to write this thing about friends, and and I kind of remember saying to him at one point, like I'm trying. Cause I started me. I think what initially kind of sparked our conversation was me saying like, I might try writing like personal essays and seeing how that feels. And I think I tried some of that and writing about like my own experiences with kind of like friendship and how I felt in my early 30s.
Hmm.
And he was like, and he was really the first person to say like, well, why don't we try like seeing, I think like you could make this into more of like a novel. Like this could be something that really feels like a real book. And I was like, oh, like I guess I hadn't really like thought of that. I don't know, just like it wasn't really something that I felt like I had thought about doing. So I was like, okay. And then it was the beginning of COVID when this was happening, and I was like had all this time to like, thankfully, I was like in a position where I was like, I was kind of just able to spend a lot of time writing. And I remember sending him the first like, I don't know, 100 pages or something. And then he was and he was so helpful, so encouraging. He's like, I truly have him to thank for this book existing. But I definitely it was not something that I necessarily it was always like, I'm gonna write a novel. Like that wasn't like how I thought about it. It sort of did take a bit of a few steps for me to get there, I think. And I feel like writing personal essays was not the way I wanted to. It didn't feel right. This felt like the way I wanted to try to do it. And then once I started, like when I was like, oh, now I'm writing a novel, then it was kind of like off to the races where I was like, okay, now I actually feel like I have places I want these characters to go that have nothing to do with really like the things I've necessarily experienced in my day to day, but that feel like ways to extrapolate from some of these themes. It kind of freed me up and felt really special and kind of exciting in a way that I was like, wow, this is like, I love this. Like it felt really like exciting to get to do.
What then was the road to publication like for the novel? So you've decided you're writing it, you're giving your agent pages, then what?
Yeah. Wow. So I think let's see. The first, so as I mentioned, I was kind of like, I sent stuff to my agent. I was kind of like, getting some feedback from him, kind of figuring out how I wanted to, as I mentioned before, have my index cards. I was trying to like structure the whole thing, piece it together. It's kind of an insane thing. Like sometimes I think back on it, I'm like, who was that person who was like, I'm gonna write a novel? Like it's just because it's like it's so crazy to just like do it, not knowing what's gonna happen. Like I really don't, it's such a leap of something. I don't know. It's just like, all right, like you just kind of go for it. But wow, really inspired. You just gotta go for it. I don't feel like I'm like a sports coach or something. But I feel like so I basically at a certain point, it was probably like a year of kind of working on it. I remember being like, okay, like we're kind of at a stage now that this is feeling like a novel, it's feeling like a book. And my agent felt similarly. And we kind of were like, okay, we're ready to like send it out there and see how people feel. And I feel so lucky that I think I don't even yeah, one of the first people that my agent was like it was like an editor that he knew and that was like this is going to be a great reader for this book and like we'll see what happens and he ended up um being really excited about the book. He kind of was immediately like got it. He like brought up his like longtime like best friend that he said like he was like feeling similar like emotions to some of the stuff that was happening with the characters in the book. Which side note has just been like a fun thing too. I feel like so many people have said to me like, "Oh, I sent this to my best friend," or like I don't know. I feel like people have like used this. I don't know. People have like I've been having interesting conversations with people about like the best friend, the Zoe or the Victor in their lives, which has been really nice. But anyway, James Malia, my editor, he was just kind of like I don't know. I feel so like lucky and thankful. Like we had our first Zoom and I was like, wow, this is just like we immediately had this simpatico. Like he talked about what kind of his vision, we did some revision a bit after like, I sold the book, but he kind of had a few thoughts and it was all aligned with like stuff that I was excited about working on. And it just felt so I don't know, it really felt perfect. And James is like a great person, particularly for this book, because he does a lot of fiction titles, but he also had done some celebrity memoirs. He's edited like Mariah Carey's book and Andy Cohen's books. So he also has like the celebrity pop culture foundation and enthusiasm, which was like really special for this particular book too. And like the fact that he blends his like fiction editing with that stuff made it like, I'm like, wow, this is like the exact kind of person that I would have dreamed of to like read my book and shepherd this through. And so I really do feel like, I don't know, I know I've listened to so many podcasts with authors my whole life and like read interviews with them. And I do feel like the editor and the agent, it really is like, you don't necessarily realize that when I was like an 8-year-old reading books, like how much like the people behind the scenes, the like fairy godmothers who are kind of like really shepherding you through this, like really are so integral to the whole thing happening. But I feel like, but yeah, I mean, and also the other, this is sort of tangential to what you asked, but like it's such a long process. Like it really is like, I mean, if I think about, I started writing this at the beginning, at the beginning of 2020. So like, now we're 2025. So like, it's a long
Mhm.
roller coaster of emotions and, ups and downs and feeling like, I remember there are periods where I was like, will I ever finish? I don't know, like you just like, you're kind of like, there's a lot. So I do feel kind of so thankful that I had these two great people to kind of like be shoulders for me to lean on through the whole thing and kind of like help guide me through.
Do you have a daily writing routine that you stick to, or what?
I laugh because like I wish I was I feel like oh my God, I had coffee with a writer friend of mine last week who was like, he's so disciplined. I'm in awe of him. He like literally gets up I'm sure that writers you've interviewed, I've listened to episodes of your podcast and they've said this. Like they get up at like 7, they go right to the library, they write for 6 hours and they go about their day. And I'm like, God, I wish I was better at like that. Like I don't know. I think what ruined me a little bit is uh because I've had so many odd years, especially before I was at Vanity Fair, of like my first job for New York Magazine, I was actually the night blogger. So I was writing 8 posts every night. So my hours were like 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. Like I've just had so many weird, my first job at when I first started at Vanity Fair, I had to write like a blog post that would go up at like 8 in the morning. So I just like there's like so many, I've just had so many odd. I feel like sometimes I'll be writing things at like 2 a.m. Sometimes I'll be writing things at like, the middle of the morning. I don't know, so it's just I'm all over the place. So I'll have weeks where I'm like so productive, writing every like, like as a normal person, quote unquote, like writing all like for, I'll wake up, I'll have my coffee and I'll like write for the day. Then I'll have weeks where I'm like weirdly like doing stuff, I don't even know what during the day. And then like I'll write all night. Like I don't know, I just feel like I'm all over the place.
Mhm.
Long way of saying I'm all over the place. But I feel like I do well on a deadline, which I guess probably isn't a surprise given my background. Like I feel like I need like a concrete, the draft is due Friday at 8 and I'll get it
Mhm.
by Friday at 8, but like who knows when or how, but like it'll happen. And sometimes I'm really great and disciplined. Sometimes I'm not as disciplined, but I'm getting better. I think I'm like, especially with the novel, it was really, really important for me to not lose my mind, to feel like I had like structure. So it was like I needed to do a certain number of hours every day to feel like, or pages. It depended on like where I was in the process. But like if I didn't feel like I was like doing something every day, I would start feeling like, where am I in my life?
Are
Um,
you working on another novel now?
yeah, I am. I think, I have to say, like, I have something I'm working on, which I'm excited about. I do feel like this has been the launch of my debut novel feels like it's been a bit of I hesitate to say full-time job because I'm working on other stuff and I do feel like but it's really all consuming in a way that, is exciting, but it's definitely been like hard and to be like, okay, I'm gonna like really write all day on something else. I just feel like there's a lot of stuff happening with the book coming out, which is really exciting, but it's just, um, but I feel like it's been nice actually at certain periods the past few months to be able to like focus on something else. I do feel like I feel like it's going to be great. I'm someone who does very well like knowing what the setup of something is or what the structure is. Like when I was
Mhm.
a kid, my dad would always take me to like before the first day of like third grade. He would like take me the day before to like see where like my locker was and where the like bathroom was. Like I need to I like knowing where things are. So
Mhm.
I guess my tortured metaphor here is that like I kind of feel like that I feel like my second book, I'm gonna feel like, okay, now I kind of am understanding a bit more how this all works and what I want to express. And I don't know, it's gonna be exciting, I feel like.
Do
Um,
you outline or are you a pantser?
are most people, do you get like 50-50? I'm
Yeah.
curious. Yeah.
Yeah, you know what? I think it's usually people say they can't adhere to an outline, or maybe they'll try to outline, but they can't, like, they
Yeah,
throw it away, or it's like some combination normally of sitting down and writing for a while to see what happens
what
and then
happened?
trying to make some sense of it. And
It's funny because I do feel like I'm a little bit in between where like as I said, especially because the book was a little I hesitate to say complicated. It wasn't like this was like Memento or something, but it was like, but it was like there's a lot of
complicated.
characters. So
Hmm.
like and I feel like there was like stuff I was really trying to juggle and like I did feel at times like I needed if I didn't have I'm really happy I did have like a pretty clear outline at the beginning of like just as I said, like the kind of key beats of the story. Because I feel like if I hadn't had that, then I feel like it could have gotten a little bit unwieldy. It could have gotten me. I feel like I could have lost my mind a bit with it. But yes, that said, there were definitely places where I was like, okay, like I outlined this to be a Valentina chapter, but like, is that what makes sense? I was like, I called some audibles, I guess. I was kind of like, all right, maybe let's see if we switch it to Erica. Like flipping some of the like choices I had made when I was outlining initially, and that felt like natural, or that felt more like how the story was like playing out for me, just in kind of understanding the characters better. There was one or two plot shifts I made as I was going as well, where I was like, I don't know, maybe just again, just like kind of feeling out the characters and feeling like, you know what, I thought this is what was going to happen with Oliver, and now I'm feeling like maybe it isn't. Like I feel like there was a few things that I did shift, and it was kind of gut feeling stuff like that. But I'm somewhere in between. Also, when I say outline, I'm also not really like I know what I want to happen in the chapter, but then I kind of let it flow out of me a bit. So I do feel like it's always like a dance of that too. Like I feel like I'm letting myself have room to explore within the parameters of the outline, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you know now that you wish you had known before you started this process of publishing your first novel?
Oh wow. I feel like I might even have a different answer for you. So the book we're talking now, and it comes out in about 2 weeks. So I'm curious how I'm gonna feel in like 4 weeks time. But I think some of these things I've said already, but I do think um the people around you are like your champions and savior. I just feel like I feel I felt I knew both of them in a way that made me feel like this is going to be great, but like it really is so important. I feel like to have your agent and editor be people that like you love and believe in you, that you believe in them. Like I feel like that feels like a really like important part of this that I think I knew on some level, but I feel like I know even more now. I would say, you know, something I didn't realize was how this is going to sound so corny. I can't even believe I'm saying this, but like how like kind of special I was comparing this almost to like how I'm not married. So I feel like people who actually are married might say this is like the craziest thing to say, but like it almost feels like a wedding. I don't know. It feels very like exciting. It feels like people are coming out who like I haven't talked to in like 10 years to just like reach out and like, excited to read the book, or people who have read The Galley, or like some of the conversations I've alluded to of like people talking about their friendships. And like I've had these kind of really beautiful conversations with some of my longtime friends based on after they finish the book, where we're like crying on the phone to each other. And like, I don't know, it just feels like maybe it just wasn't something I was like thinking about so much, maybe working on it, because it's such a solitary process. And like to write a book, you really have to just burrow down into your hole, and like you kind of just feel like you lose touch with reality on some level. You're kind of just like in your own world, and your characters are like your friends. And I feel like it didn't occur to me maybe that like this part of it was going to be so kind of special to suddenly have it be like read by other people. And it's been so special having people who I don't know at all write me already. Like it's like people who have written me these like really nice emails who have the galley and have said like, who I've never met and don't know, and they're like responding to certain things in the book, or pulling out lines, and I'm like, wow, this is like people are reading it. Like I don't know, just like it just suddenly it's like a living, breathing thing out in the world. It doesn't even feel like, this may sound strange to say, but it almost doesn't feel like mine in the same way anymore. It's kind of just
Mhm.
like it's not this like weird Word document on my laptop. It's kind of just like out in the world as like as a kind of I don't know, evolving thing. And it's kind of that part of it I don't think I kind of was even thinking about. So I feel like that feels very exciting and special in a way I wasn't realizing. That's such a sappy answer. I feel like
It's a
that
great answer.
I feel like I think most people should say like, oh, like keep it under 100 words. I don't know, like people should give you like concrete stuff. And I'm like,
Sometimes sappy is right, though.
yeah,
Sometimes
yeah,
sappy
yeah,
is
yeah,
right.
yeah. That's okay. We'll go with that. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I will say the other thing though is that maybe on a less sappy note is that I said this already, but like it's a long process, and I think having I again like and maybe something I was vaguely aware of, but I don't think I quite kind of understood even from like when you sell the book to when it comes out. It's like a year and a half. It's like it's just a lot change. I remember when I sold the book, I was like, wow, like I'm gonna have two birthdays and an election. The election's gonna happen before my book comes out. Like it felt like in like 2025 felt like the sci-fi year, and then it happened kind of. It felt like forever, and then also like went by in 2 seconds. It's interesting. It's kind of like you start understanding. I don't know. You kind of time starts warping in kind of these ways that you don't even kind of anticipate.
What's your best advice for aspiring authors?
So off that, I think you really have to. I've heard other writers say similar things, but like believe in what you're doing. Like you have to love it yourself. And I feel like I try to, I mean, and I'm not good at this. I feel like I'm like trying to tell myself this all the time, but it's like you like ultimately, like if you're going to spend 5 years, 6 years, 10 years, however long, I've heard so many different things from different novelists. Like, you kind of, if you're not obsessed with it, if you're not like, falling hard for it every day, and obviously you're gonna have moments where you fall out of love with it, and like, I think that's only natural and like healthy. But I think ultimately, like you have to just believe in it yourself. I think I mentioned the editor, the agent, all the people around you. I have such amazing friends and my family and support in my life, but like, and all of them make the world of difference. But like ultimately, like you have to be the one that's like, this is something that I want to spend, I love this. And I think most writers I talk to feel that way. It's kind of why you get into this
Mhm.
deranged job we have. But it's like, but I think it kind of I feel it more now than I maybe ever did before, just of like the way this whole process has played out.
We have a traditional last question on
Okay.
the podcast.
Oh yes, I think I know what it's gonna be. But yes.
Okay, when early 30s is made into a movie or series, what do you think the theme song should be?
Uh, So it's funny. I feel like my first thought, someone brought up the Friends theme song to me recently, which is too on the nose, and I don't want to use that for early 30s. But and I know this is kind of probably like an off-brand because as we mentioned, there's light and dark in the book, but there's a Lorde song, Writer in the Dark, and I feel like that's playing in more to maybe some of the like darkness going on because it's kind of about the torturedness or kind of the complicated feelings you can have as a writer who's writing about the world. And I feel like that song, I was just re-listening to Melodrama's like the album for me. And I feel like I was listening to that song recently and I was like, wow, this is very like early 30s energy where it's just like about what it's like to write about other people, to be projected on other people, what it's like to project. So I don't know if it's like, it's not really like the upbeat, cheery theme song you might imagine for like, but I feel like Writer in the Dark feels like the song for me somehow.
I think that sounds perfect. I love that it's not upbeat, Sherry. It works
Yeah,
perfectly
yeah.
that way.
I think that's right, actually. I feel like that fits somehow. And Lord's mentioned in the book. So I actually feel like I didn't even think about that till right now. So it actually makes sense. I feel like it's only fitting or something.
It's perfect. Josh Duboff, thank you so much for joining today. It has been so much fun getting the chance to talk with you.
I'm so appreciative, Kelley. Thank you so much for having me.
To hear the dirt on Josh's worst celebrity interview, along with his tips for conducting a great interview and for querying a novel, head over now to the Patreon. Thanks for joining us on Literary Prospects. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a review. We'll see you next time.